Alright, here is probably one of the most famous concept narrative albums. This is Queensryche Operation Mindcrime. This came out in 1988, and it was at a time where concept narrative albums weren't really all that big. Although Iron Maiden did release Seventh Son of a Seventh Son in the same year, I believe it was, if not the year before. I think it was the same year. Anyway, this is the story about a drug junkie named Nicky who is very dissatisfied with society, and he comes in touch with a revolutionary named Dr. X who convinces him that they are going to change society for the better, and if Nicky will cooperate with him, he can be part of the team to do this. It happens along the way that Nicky meets up with a nun who was formerly a prostitute, but who was then saved by a priest, a father, who saved her, and she became a nun. However, the priest is actually corrupt, and he still apparently takes Mary on the altar once a week, like a sacrifice. So things are not really all that rosy. Nicky sees that Mary and he are kind of kindred spirits. They are both trying to escape from a broken past and have something to live for their future. However, Dr. X, I think, doesn't really like this idea, and so of Nicky and Mary connecting. So one day he meets up with Nicky and gives him a gun, well, actually he's already given him a gun, but he tells Nicky that you have to go and kill Mary because she's a risk for their plan, and to kill the priest as well. So in the big piece, the Sweet Sister Mary, Nicky goes to the church. He has killed the priest. He meets with Mary, but he does not want to kill her, and he tries to tell her we should escape from here together. He ends up leaving the church. Mary stays. Nicky doesn't kill her. However, then there's a part about the needle never lies, and after that there's some voices saying, we know you did it, why'd you do it, why'd you do it? And it seems that he returns to meet Mary and finds her dead. Now, I'm not sure because I didn't reread the synopsis of the story, but when I listened to the album recently, it made me think, did Nicky get some kind of shot, which then he doesn't remember his actions and he actually did go and kill Mary, or was Mary killed by someone else while he was, I don't know, drugged up or something, not sure. But anyway, Mary is dead. And the story actually begins, the album begins with him in hospital, and we can hear as a nurse comes in talking to him. In the background, the TV news is on saying that there has been a recent spate of deaths of religious leaders in the city, and the police have a suspect in custody in state hospital. So we can gather by the story that they are, of course, talking about Nicky. And at the end of the album, we return to him being in hospital. I don't actually remember what happened between finding out that Mary was dead and him being in the hospital, but yeah. Actually, I don't remember about that. Well, somebody probably can put it in the comments if you think about it. But there was one interesting thing that I noticed. At the very beginning, the nurse sees him wandering around after curfew, and then she says, perhaps you need another shot. And I thought, listening to this again the other day, that's really interesting because a shot could mean shot from a gun. You know, he didn't kill Mary as he was supposed to. Could also mean he needs another chance to do the right thing in his life, because the nurse actually then calls him a bastard afterwards. There are a couple of different meanings, but of course another shot, she's actually giving him a needle, and then that needle concept comes up later on in the song that says, don't ever trust the needle always lies. But near the very end, he's thinking about Mary, and he says, now who will come to wash away my sins, clean my rooms, fix my meals, be my friend? And right after that, where it's echoing, my friend, 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 we hear the background sounds from the hospital again, which is kind of funny. Who will come to clean my room and fix my meals? It's that nurse that called you a bastard and gave you another shot. I just noticed that when I was listening to this the other day anyway. But yeah, this was such a huge thing when it came out, and it's still very fondly remembered. Some people think of it as Queensryche's greatest achievement. There are the Sword album I talked about. The guy who wrote the story was inspired by this album when he was 16, he said. And one interesting point is, this album, I read that it was when Jeff Tate was visiting l'Oratoire de Saint-Joseph in Montreal that he first started thinking about the idea for the story. And another album I'm going to talk about, the original seed for the story, was also inspired by an event in Montreal. And why I think that's really special is because I was born in Montreal. Anyway, Operation Mindcrime by Queensryche. All right. And here we are, the other album that was inspired by an incident in Montreal. While Pink Floyd were performing at a concert, a very irritating fan was really getting on Roger Waters' nerves, and he spat on her. And afterwards he thought, wouldn't it be nice if they could just build a wall between the band and the audience so that the band could play and their music without being distracted by the audience. And that was the beginning of the idea for Pink Floyd's The Wall. Now, of course, this one here, the story is about a man whose father died at the end of World War II when he was still an infant, and so he was raised very protectively by his mother. He went to the English public school system where the headmasters and the teachers were all very, very brutal with the kids, often insulting them, making fun of them, or sometimes just hitting them or knocking them down, whatever, all for their own good, as Eric Idle of Monty Python said in one interview I heard. They're all around from the same age anyway. He ends up becoming a rock star, and he's married, but during one of his long tours, I think he gets into drugs. He spends a lot of his time in his drugged out world and his music, and his wife begins to feel alienated. So one day, while he's off on a grand tour in the United States, he calls home and finds that there is a man answering the phone at his home, and he sinks into kind of deep despair. The album tells us that, you know, the effects of losing his father, being raised by his protective mother, being basically humiliated throughout his school life, and now his wife leaving him, he goes into a deep depression, shuts himself out from the world, stays in his hotel room, and locks himself in, basically, and goes into this kind of, I don't know, mental depression or whatever. And then, of course, he has to perform, so his manager comes in, they give him a shot, we're onto the shot thing again, and he has to go out and perform. However, in his mind, he imagines that he has become some kind of totalitarian, fascist-type dictator, and that they are trying to reshape Britain like a kind of Nazi Germany style. And in the end, he basically just realizes that he wants this all to stop. And finally there is this big trial in his mind where his mother and his wife and his school teachers testify against him, and the judge finally passes judgment and says that you must be punished by being exposed before all your peers, so tear down the wall. And one of the really cool things about this is at the very beginning of the album, it starts with a bit of faint music and somebody saying, "Where we came in," and the album begins. And at the very end, we're hearing that music, and as the album is coming to an end, you hear someone say, "Isn't this where we..." So if you play it, it becomes a loop, like, "Isn't this where we came in?" or something like this, right? Which I think was a neat little idea. This was made into a movie, which I watched several times during my teen years, and I really loved it. And this is probably the most famous concept narrative album that I'm going to talk about in this video. And I still really enjoy listening to it. Even though I only listen to it once every few years, it's like watching an old favorite movie again. I really love it. So that is Pink Floyd's The Wall. I think everybody watching this video probably already knows what it's about anyway. Some people I know don't like it. Oh well, I love it. And one interesting note I want to put in, there was a comic strip in the 1980s called Bloom County with a character called Opus the Penguin. And Opus the Penguin is a tuba player. And he goes to see this movie, and as they're in the theater, one person says to him, one of the other characters says, "I didn't know you liked heavy metal music." And then Opus says, "Doesn't heavy metal just mean that they have a large tuba section or brass section or something like that?" But it was interesting that they would mention heavy metal with this album, and I think I always thought that was kind of odd because I don't think of Pink Floyd as a heavy metal band. However, there are some very dark riffs on this album, and there are some very heavy riffs on this album. So if we think we're going back to 1980, what was being called heavy metal at that time could include some of these songs on here for those riffs and the kind of dark and almost creeping insanity type feeling in some parts there too. So it is, of course, not a heavy metal album, but there are elements of heavy metal, at least for what heavy metal was at the time, on this. So that was a kind of interesting thing that I thought I would throw in. Okay, let's move along to the next album. Alright, so we have 4 more albums to go. This is Arion, The Human Equation. This is Arion's second biggest selling album. The first one, Into the Electric Castle, is the first. Most of Arion's albums are, I think if not all of them, concept albums, narrative concepts. And they are also rock operas. So there are many guest vocalists in here, each of them playing the part of a different character. In Into the Electric Castle, there are 8 individuals from different periods of time who are brought together on this mysterious world that is outside of time and space. And they must cross over through this landscape and go through this electric castle and come out the other side. Some of them do not make it on the journey. Some of them pass away along the way or encounter something that makes them want to just lie down and give up. But in the end, 4 people make it through to the other side. I really like that album. The story is kind of a bit weird, maybe a kind of Twilight Zone type thing, but it is a really brilliant album. However, this was my first Arion album, and it features James LeBrie on here, as well as Michael Ackerfeldt of Opeth. So at the time I got this, I was really into both Dream Theater and Opeth, so that was really cool. Heather Finlay from Mostly Autumn is on here. At the time I had picked up a Mostly Autumn album, and this was my introduction to the vocals of Devin Townsend, who I kept hearing about, but I knew nothing about him or what he was doing or what kind of music he played, and I didn't really feel I was interested. But after hearing his performance on here, I then rushed out and ended up buying almost everything I could get my hands on. Anyway, this album, The Human Equation, is about a man who is in the hospital, in the hospital again, and in a coma. And there are 2 other characters, his best friend and his wife. And as the story unfolds, every day he is having some kind of dialogue with some of his different emotions or memories. Basically, the story is that he had a mysterious accident in broad daylight on an open road. He crashed into a tree. We don't know why. However, it is revealed slowly then that he had seen his wife with another man. He had seen her smiling at another man. And after a whole bunch of calamity in his life over the years, similar I guess to The Wall, he finally just snapped and he drove off down the road and just crashed into a tree. Now, as it turns out, his wife was actually really upset because he had recently been so busy with work and he had been kind of ignoring her, similar theme to The Wall, and his best friend came to talk to her and gave her a hug of consolation. And at that time, that's when he saw that, oh, she's holding my best friend and smiling. But it was completely innocent thing. It was just one friend helping out another friend, basically. But he took it the wrong way, crashed the car. Now, during his time in the hospital, he has these dialogues with, or he hears the voices in his head, voices of passion, voices of love, voices of pain, voices of rage, voices of reason. Also, he imagines his father coming to speak to him. Whether his father actually would come to meet him in hospital, I think it's more of a memory because his father left his family when he was a child, and his father is a real total ass of a person. So anyway, we find out also about his life. His father left him when he was a child. He was bullied at school, and he decided to try to get back at the bullies by becoming very successful. However, once he achieved his success and got back at the bullies, then he felt he didn't want to stop. And as it turns out, he had the opportunity to take over a very high position in the company. However, his best friend, who was also in the company, was always the better person. But his best friend had at one time doctored the books, and the main character knew that by exposing that, his friend would probably be kicked out of the company and then he would get the position. So he opens up the file on the computer for everybody to find. They see it. Of course, his best friend is taken in by the management, the executive of the company, and they let him go and give the position to the me character in here, which is played by James LeBrie. So this is the whole story. And at the end, like, his best friend, he finally comes out of his coma. His wife is so glad. He wants to be back to being a good husband to her. He and his friend make up. It's kind of a happy ending. But at the very, very end, we find out that the whole thing has been a kind of simulation for an alien-type character who has lost all his grasp of emotion and is the same character that was in the Electric Castle, bringing those 8 people through that landscape. And as it turns out, this Forever of the Stars character actually appears over several Arion albums. So there is like all these albums end up being like books in a series where each of the songs are a chapter in the book. So I think that was really, really cool. So that's Arion, the Human Equation. Dream Theater, Metropolis, Scenes from a Memory, Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory. Now this one, I think this was my second Dream Theater album, and this is the album that really made me think, wow, what an incredible band. I really loved the story, and also because it's very similar and maybe inspired by a movie called Better Off Dead with Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson, which I watched many years before. Also, one of the characters, the voices, is done by Terry Brown, who of course produced the first 9 Rush albums, as well produced some other albums that I know about too in Canadian hard rock. So in this story here, there is a character named Nicholas. Wow, wasn't there a Nicky in the Queensryche one? Character named Nicholas, who's been having dreams where he goes to a strange house he doesn't know and enters the house, goes upstairs, and in the mirror he sees a young woman. At first he's not sure who he sees, but finally it becomes apparent it's a woman. And he's wondering about the meaning of these dreams, why they keep recurring. So he goes to a hypnotherapist, Terry Brown's character, and he goes through a hypnosis, and he begins to discover that in a past life he was a young woman, and it is revealed that that young woman was in a relationship with a man who had an older brother, but that man was a compulsive gambler, and the older brother is a really go-getter type, and he decides he wants that young woman for himself. They do actually have a physical encounter, if you know what I mean. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more. And then the man decides, okay, I'm going to make her my wife. However, the woman feels really bad and goes back to the man's brother, and the man comes and ends up killing them both and then fleeing the scene. Now this takes place in the 1920s, so they don't have DNA forensic science and all that kind of thing, but the man then shows up and tells the police that he heard a gunshot, he went in and he found this scene here, and he has actually put a note in his brother's pocket, so it looks like it was a kind of lover-suicide thing. Shoot the woman, shoot himself, and that's the end of the story, right? And so the main character in the story believes that is what has happened, and he goes to find the grave of this young woman, and he cries and feels sorry that her life ended so short. However, there is a darker side to this, which is what happens in Dead Again. As it turns out, the brother who killed them both has also been reincarnated and exists in the modern world at the same time as Nicholas, and that character has now discovered that he has been exposed, and he goes after Nicholas. And can you guess who that person is? What's interesting is that in the movie Dead Again, it is actually revealed there is a climax scene, and then that person who has been reincarnated and who then tries to kill the both of them ends up having a horrific accident and dying himself. In this story here, the character just shows up with a hint of malice in his voice, and that's the end of the album. We just hear a record scratching at the end. I really liked it though, because I recognized where the story had come from, and I just thought it was really cool. And of course this has some of Dream Theater's most memorable, fantastic music, particularly the Dance of Eternity, which is such an amazing instrumental with so much technicality to it. You can find people on YouTube reacting to the music of the Dance of Eternity. This album, the whole story was actually based on, it came from a song from the Images and Words album, which was called Metropolis, And this was supposed to be a continuation of that story, and it ended up becoming a whole album. So there it is, one of also the kind of big concept narrative albums out there. And I think also partly inspired by albums such as The Wall and Operation Mindcrime. Dream Theater, Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory. The last Rush album ever to be released of all their studio albums, Clockwork Angels. This here is based on a story, it's a story written by Neil Peart about a man in a steampunk society who wants something bigger for his life. So he leaves his comfortable life and goes out into the world and has many different experiences. He lives in a society where there is a watchmaker who is basically kind of like the god of the society. He takes care of his people and makes sure that they are safe and so on. That's what they all believe. And there are these big clockwork angels in the center of the city which represent the protectors of the people. But he goes off on these wild journeys. He finds the 7 cities of gold. He finds some people who lure ships in at night by shining lights on the rocky coast, so the ships think they're coming into safety and then crash on the rocks, and then the people come down ignoring the drowning sailors and just steal everything they can, which is actually based on a book that Neil Peart read, which is based on a true piece of history, which is pretty wild. The music on here is actually, I just listened to it again for the first time in many years. It is actually really an incredible album. I gotta say that again. As well as the story, which is really interesting. So each song tells a chapter of this, the protagonist's adventures out there in the world. There's also an anarchist who tries to set off a grenade in a fairground and so on. And at the very end, this person, after so many adventures, reflects back on his life. And very much similar to what I guess Neil must have been thinking, and certainly a very good closure to Neil's life, because as we know, Neil passed away in January of 2020. So I can't help now when I think about The Garden, the final song, to think about that. But it is a brilliant album and a very interesting story, and it was later on made into a graphic novel and a novel with Kevin J. Anderson, whom I know about because he co-wrote the prequels to the Dune series. All right, Clockwork Angels by Rush. The final album I want to talk about is by a band called Gandalf's Fist, and this is The Clockwork Fable. We are on a clockwork theme here. This album tells the story of an underground human society. There was some kind of nuclear holocaust that made the surface of the earth unlivable. The surviving members of humanity went into the underground caverns that they could find, and we are in one society here called Cogtopolis, which is a great underground city which is powered by a giant cog, which generates the power to work all the other things in the city. So again, it's a kind of steampunk society here. The story is really interesting because there are characters. There is the tinkerer who can repair things, and his young female companion Eve, who is, I'm not really sure how they're related, and then a robot that he created called Boy. There is the Primarch, who is the leader of Cogtopolis, and then there is also a leader of the religious group that supplies the kind of, I guess, the religious, anyway, who provides the kind of religious services for the society. They say that they are all shadow-born, and that they are, I don't know, kept in the shadows from the light, whatever. And the light, meaning up on the surface of the earth, is dangerous, so they have to stay in the shadows, kind of thing. Anyway, there are some other interesting characters too, and these are all played out as a kind of radio play with dialogue and sound effects and so on, which trade places with the actual music track. So you have a part of the radio play and then a song, and a part of the radio play and a song, and it is really so well done that the first time I listened to it, I was so eager to hear it again just to pay more attention to the play as it was going on, and then listen to it a third time for the actual music. The songs, usually after this part of the radio play has introduced some setting or some character, then the song will be from that character's perspective, giving us some additional background information. However, there is also a third element to this story, and that is the lamp lighter. And the lamplighter encounters a traveler, and determining that the traveler is not someone dangerous, he decides to take the traveler with him on his lamplighting rounds and give him a tour of Cogtopolis. Now, the traveler is actually the listener. So, we are constantly being spoken to, and the lamplighter is giving us all the background information of the story as well, so we understand about the cog and about the Primarch and about the bishop and so on. It is really so well done. That's why I'm talking about this one last. The characters, the voices, the dialogue, the story itself, and what's happening is that the great cog is slowing down, and the Tinkerer believes that this means that the sun is returning, and the cog itself seems to almost be aware of it. Now, there is actually a long ladder going up to a sealed doorway at the very top, which leads to the surface, and that has been sealed for over 200 years, and to open it you need 2 cogs, but they don't know where these cogs are. However, the cogs of course are found in the story, but the Primarch refuses to let these people out because he wants to continue his position as Primarch, ruling over Cogtopolis. The bishop, he wants to keep his religious group going, so he kind of supports not letting everybody out into the light, but at the same time, the Primarch is against him because he doesn't agree with everything the Primarch says. So there's this kind of tension that's going on. The Primarch and the bishop both are trying to find the Tinkerer. They want to stop the people from getting out, and it is just such an incredible story and done so miraculously well. Now, it is actually a 3 CD album, so it is a long listen. I've only actually ever heard it 4 times all the way through. But fantastic piece of work, The Clockwork Fable by Gandalf's Fist. And that is enough for this video. So there you have it, 13 concept narrative albums that I think are really brilliant. Okay, thank you for watching. I'll see you again in the next video, and I'm probably going to try to rush to get it out soon. So maybe in a week or so. Okay everyone, thanks. Take care, and enjoy December.